So yes, I just mentioned that we had some great responses to the pre-event survey that have raised some really interesting questions, and I hope that they will be part of the discussion that we have today. Most people have joined this lunchtime because they want to learn about the topic, and obviously that's what we want to hope to offer you as well. And people are interested in Lynbreck Croft, which is great, and they're interested in how to take forward a tree planting project. For instance, looking around, looking at mosaics in landscapes, at techniques for supporting native woodland, and also as new entrants themselves, new entrants to woodland crofts in particular. So if your question doesn't get mentioned in the general discussion, please repost that. And I'd also like to say that any questions that we don't manage to get to, we will follow up with colleagues in the James Hutton Institute. I'm not a woodland expert, and so we would just like to make sure we pass on the right information. But I think without further ado, I'd like to hand over to our first speaker, if I can get my slide to move on. Excuse me. Oh no, I'm not, sorry. This is where I've forgotten. I'd just like to give a short introduction to the NEFERTITI project, who are hosting this event. So NEFERTITI is a very strange name. It's nothing to do with ancient Egyptian queens, but it's an acronym for this long title, Networking European Farms to Enhance Cross-Fertilisation and Innovation Uptake Through Demonstration. It's a Horizon 2020 project. It's funded by the European Commission. It runs until the end of next year, and the purpose is to support on-farm demonstration activities and farmer-to-farmer or crofter-to-crofter peer learning. And this year, during this unusual time, we're doing instead virtual demonstration activities. But what we hope to do is to transport you to that farm environment or to the landscape that you would be in. The project's a large project. It has 45 national hubs. So we have a Scottish hub and on 10 different themes covering all different types of agriculture and innovation in agriculture across 12 countries. And in Scotland, our focus is to encourage new people and to explore new pathways to work in Scottish agriculture. Because as we know, we have a concern around agricultural sustainability with an ageing farming population and certain barriers facing new entrants to the industry. So this is what we're trying to discuss and tackle through on-farm demonstrations. As I mentioned, there's a network of people who are involved in the NEFERTITI Hub in Scotland. We invite you all to participate and to continue to join these NEFERTITI activities. And what we do is to share experiences and to bring people together who have expertise to share. The Hub also aims to cover all regions of Scotland and all farming types. So I pose this question: if you are a demonstration farmer or you're willing to provide your farm as a demonstration location, then please do keep in touch with us and participate in the NEFERTITI project. Last year, quite a lot of outside activities. Look at all these people being close together and touching each other even. We did some training about how to communicate and to facilitate peer-to-peer learning on farms. We had a panel discussion at Arable Scotland. We supported Open Farm Sunday, so appealing to the younger generation and to the general public about what actually happens on new entrant farms. And we had an event at the Highland Show where we brought together policymakers and new entrants to talk about the issues that they face. So hopefully in the next year we'll be out and about, but this year does give us the opportunity to come together virtually. So as I've mentioned, we would really like you to keep being involved. You can register on the NEFERTITI website. What I've mentioned here is the demonstration platform. You can register as a demonstration farmer or an innovation actor, by which we mean a farm advisor, someone who works in the industry, a researcher, or otherwise connected to agriculture or crofting. And so I encourage you to follow the links in the NEFERTITI webpage. I provided a hyperlink in the email yesterday, and please tick farm attractiveness. This is the name of the hub. It doesn't mean that you have an attractive farm. It means that we want to learn about how to bring people into the industry, so to attract new people into farming and crofting in Scotland. Another way to connect with us is to follow the Facebook page, which we regularly update with relevant news articles and events. But now I'm going to pass on, and I'm really delighted that we have Lyn Cassels from Lynbreck Croft. Lyn and Sandra have been very active in the NEFERTITI project and other projects that we work with in the James Hutton Institute, and I'm grateful for their participation. So Lyn moved to Lynbreck Croft in March 2016 with her partner Sandra, and with no background in agriculture, they started on a journey to build a new business built on the principles of farming with nature. And they now both work full-time at Lynbreck, running a diversified rural enterprise, producing local food and engaging with a local, national and international audience. And I'm just going to stop my screen share. Oops. Oh, where is it gone? Here we are. Sorry about that. This is all very clunky, but thank you for your patience. And I'll pass this over to Lyn, and she should be able to share her screen, which is very, very visually attractive, very attractive to new entrants. Thank you. Okay, Lyn, hopefully you can start sharing now.
Okay,
we're also battling with all rural broadband, so we will highlight that in the feedback. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Annie, for to this event today, and welcome everybody to Lynbreck Croft. So for those of you who don't really know much about us, we are a registered croft, but we are a very large croft. We are 150 acres, or just under 61 hectares. And we are located in the Cairngorms National Park, just outside Granton-on-Spey. And we're situated at about 350 metres. The croft generally is on a slope, ranging from about 320 up to about 450 metres. But our homestead is at about 350 metres. So facing due south, which is great for the sun, but it means that we do get all of the weather that comes directly from the south. So I just want an introduction to ourselves. Yeah, so I brought the croft with my partner Sandra, so I'm there in the green t-shirt, Sandra's in the brown t-shirt, and this is an event where we won an award last year for the Best Young Farmers Woodland from the Scottish Finest Woods Awards. Which was a really great time for us, but our background is not in farming at all. As Annie mentioned, we worked as rangers for the National Trust, and then spent a couple of years working planting trees in the Scottish borders before we moved up to Scotland. And I think it's really important to make that, or to share that with you, because whilst we know a lot about trees, and we've worked with trees in many ways, we didn't know anything about farming at all. But one thing that we have adopted since we took over Lynbreck is something that's called holistic management. And holistic management is basically a tool, it's a framework that helps you build a new farm business. And the important point about the word holistic management is the word holistic. So you're looking at everything in the whole, so the social, economic and environmental impact that your farming will have. So going back to trees, but in that short period of time, we've already lived through what I would say are a number of extreme or prolonged extreme weather events. So this was taken in September 2017. It was a visit that we had by the Organic Research Centre back in the early days, and it was an incredibly wet summer. It rained and rained and rained and rained. Very long winter. For us, it was a very long winter. So we had about 5 months of snow cover here at Lynbreck, and you can see our pigs there rootling around in the snow. The following summer, we went into a drought. So our well ran dry. This picture is of Sandra down at the River Spey collecting water. We had to do that every day for 2 to 3 months just to get enough water for our pigs and our hens and ourselves. They were absolutely boiling. All our animals were boiling. It was about 30 degrees every day. So what we were kind of living through was what we really felt was actual kind of climate change, and all of this nature telling us what it was that we had to do with our new farm business at Lynbreck, and that in effect is to increase tree cover, which you'll hear about today. First project was a woodland creation project. So Lynn White from Scottish Forestry will tell you more about this, but in effect, we looked up at our hill ground and we saw that there were a number of Scots pines marching up the hillside. And basically that the hill was trying to reforest itself as a result of low intensity grazing. The trees that were coming back were Scots pine, but very, very few broadleaf. So we decided to literally take nature as a guide and help the reforestation process through planting broadleaf trees. So we got in touch with Scottish Forestry with the assistance of the Woodland Trust, and we decided to do the application ourselves. We felt it was our project and we were the ones that knew best about it. So with the assistance of our woodland officer at Scottish Forestry and an appointed person at the Woodland Trust, we did the application and were successful. The first part of the project involved putting up a deer fence, which we hired contractors to do. Everything from that point we did ourselves. So we planted roughly about a 12-hectare woodland at a density of about 1,600 trees per hectare. Next thing that we had to do was the ground preparation. So again, we were thinking about things like soil health. Okay, so one of the ways in which you can really damage soil health is to compact it. So we didn't want to have to use a digger or anything like that to go up on the slope. So we decided to instead use a brush cutter. So it's basically a strimmer with a metal head, and we cut out 17,500 spots in which we were going to plant our trees. So it was a bit of an effort, but it meant that we were, avoiding any compaction, and it's been a really effective way of getting our trees into the ground. So it was simply cutting a patch of heather about a foot square, and then we planted directly into that. Thinking about if we were going to do this on a bigger scale, you can use things like diggers, and one of the ways, which is quite a good way, is something that's called inverted mounding, which is when you can literally scoop a bit of the earth out and plonk it back into the hole, and that means that you're at least mitigating all the landscape impact. But I'm sure there's many more people that have more expertise on that than I do. So again, we did all of this ourselves over a period of about 4 to 5 weeks, in order to make sure that we were within the time frame that we committed to for Scottish Forestry. So it was 17,500 trees, and it was all native broadleaf. So we oak, birch, rowan, lots of willow, alder, wild cherry, hazel, hawthorn, holly, that sort of mix. So a nice kind of native broadleaf mix. And we used a range of protection. So on the lower slopes, and this is the area that you're looking at here, so that's actually me planting. Hopefully you can see the cursor moving around me. On this slope here, we used 60 centimetre plastic guards, and then higher up we used 20 centimetre vole guards. They're plastic too. Now I say the word plastic because we hate plastic. We really did not want to have to use plastic at all. We tried to do, we tried to keep on top of herbivore impact. I'm a trained deer stalker. We also shoot rabbits on the croft. So we've tried to do everything that we can. But at the end of the day, we did have to go down the use of using these tree guards, mainly because whenever you sign up to a contract with Scottish Forestry, you're signing into a contract. If your trees don't get up and away, you're failing on your contract, and that could have serious financial implications. So it's really worth being clear about that the use of the guards were sort of unfortunately a necessary evil that we had to use to help get the trees up and away, but that's for a further discussion later. And my partner inspecting one of the trees, and this is one of the taller guards that I was talking about. The reasons for planting initially were for nature. So we're very passionate about nature, we're very passionate about biodiversity. That is what our business is built on. But we are now, we now run an agricultural business, and we had to see that as being a part of our woodland creation, and it very much is. We're thinking about shade, we're thinking about shelter, we're thinking about water management. You know, we've had situations where we've observed, for example, our cattle on a hot day. You know, if our cattle on a hot day are in a field where they have no access to shade, that can cause stress. And if your animals start to get stressed, you know, they'll stop eating. And then you can have all sorts of health and well-being and welfare implications as a result of that. So those are all the situations that we want to avoid by providing more tree cover on the croft. So we're getting more shelter, more shade, and better space for our animals in the long-term future. That's probably our most valuable asset. So 61 hectares that we have, the existing woodland is by far the most valuable asset. Regularly for conservation grazing. So we have a small hut that they live in, which is just full of straw, and they spend their days snuffling and rooting and working in the woodlands. And the reason that we use pigs is because most of our woodlands are same species, same age birch. With a very non-diverse ground flora. So what we're trying to do is to use the pigs to break up the ground, to provide opportunities for any seeds, relic seeds in the seed bank to come up and grow, and to provide little pockets where other tree seedlings can fall and set seed and then grow again. So that's why we use the pigs. And this is area that's been pigged, and the area on the left is area that has not been pigged. And the reason why we're trying to improve this diversity in the woodland is to basically increase its resilience. So the more diverse your woodland is, the more resilient it is, particularly in relation to the age of the trees. So getting the pigs to do that work for us is really critical. We have done some planting in our existing woodlands. So we have areas where we'll do some felling, and then we'll plant some trees around that area where it's nice and light. And we can basically plant a new seed bank. We call it our tree seed bombs, with the idea being that these trees in the future will hopefully seed, and they will help to spread more diversity in our existing woodlands. So this is a course that we held back in 2018, and this was in planting one of our hedgerows. So we were able to get a grant from Woodland Trust through their More Hedges scheme, which I think covers about 60% of the costs. And we planted about 900 metres of hedging around the edge. And basically what we're trying to do is create a giant tree hug around our field, so that at any time on any particular day, our animals will be sheltered and protected from any prevailing winds or really hot sunlight. And it also provides them additional fodder as well. So anything in addition to what they can access in the field, they can browse from the hedgerow too. And then Brucey bonus on top of all of that, habitat corridors connecting all of the different sections of the croft. So it's really, it's win, 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 win. And agricultural enterprises into the tree setup. They are not separate. They are all very much intrinsically linked, just like we have the pigs in the woodland. We use hens in our hedgerows. So we have a number of small hen houses that we can wheel up into our hedgerows, and we have the girls run up and down the hedgerows for the summer months, and they help to keep down competing grasses, scratch out weeds, and then they add their own natural fertilizer as well. And again, all of that is part of the story that we tell to people whenever we're selling our produce. You know, the eggs that we produce, the pork that we produce, we link it all back to the positive environmental impact that we're having to try to have on the work that we do. So we have a small fold of Highland cattle, so we have about 10 now. They're a beef herd, so we have a mixture of breeding heifers and steers and a calf. And we noticed one day that whenever we were moving the animals into a paddock where there were trees, that they wanted to really browse the trees. So we mentioned this to a farmer friend, and he said, oh, well, you know, maybe it's something that's lacking in your grassland. And we decided to kind of flip that on its head and say, well, maybe it's not that the grassland is lacking anything. Maybe it's that the trees are providing something that the grass can't give them, that the grassland can't give them. And that's basically, that got us into thinking back to when we used to work for the National Trust, and we had learnt about this thing called tree hay. And it was basically harvesting trees as fodder for animals. So harvesting it in the summertime and then feeding it to them in the wintertime. And this is something that's been practiced for centuries. It's still practiced in some parts of Central Europe, but I mean, tree hay and tree fodder and tree browsing has been an integral part of livestock, you know, farming for long time. It's only recently that it's kind of fallen, I guess, more out of fashion. We started to learn a little bit more about it. Now, I got this graph. It's actually from a paper that was produced by the Forestry Commission, and I do believe it was the Scottish Forestry Commission back in 1999. And this was shared with us by a friend of ours, Dr Lindsay Wistance, who works for the Organic Research Centre, who's an expert on all things trees and tree fodder. And I want to draw your attention to the cattle one to begin with. So 12%. Of a cow's annual feed can come from tree leaves, if it's given access to do that. So now, if you were to directly equate that into days, that comes out at about 44 days worth of a cow's feed can come from tree leaves, which is absolutely massive whenever you look at it in that situation, which can go down to 55% or can increase to 55% in certain conditions. And even in the case of sheep, it's 20% figure from trees and shrubs. So again, a huge proportion of our livestock's nutrition is required from trees and tree leaves. Again, was another table that we got from Dr. Lindsay Wistance, and I've put up the actual place where it's come from at the bottom. But again, just have a glance. So at the bottom two, the green at the bottom are grass with herbs and legumes and red clover. So these are all the benefits that you're getting from this. Look above at what you're seeing that the trees and the tree leaves are providing. You know, sugar in particular, you know, you're getting 49.2% of sugars coming out of birch versus 44.43 from grass and 36.76. Look at protein, you know, look at fat, look at water. You know, you start to kind of put all these pieces of the puzzle together and you start to see exactly how much they're actually accessing from trees and tree leaves. So try and trial planting tree hay and fodder crops. So we approached the Woodland Trust and they provided us with funding to plant tree boxes. So this is me in one of the tree boxes that I'm planting. And in there we've planted about 400 trees, really densely packed, with the idea being that in a number of years they will grow and we will harvest them in the summertime as tree hay. So we will dry them up, we'll bundle them up in our barn, and then we'll use that as supplementary feed for the winter time. And then in the background, you'll see there's a double tram line fence. So this is our edible hedgerow, but it's edible for the animals. So it's all willow species. It's goat willow, grey willow, it's eared willow. It's planted on fairly wet ground, but these are all species that will grow in that area and that we have growing on the croft anyway. And the benefit of this will be that it will provide shelter in a very exposed field, and it will also be something that the animals can browse on. Because willow has got something that's called salicylic acid in it. It's like a type of aspirin, so the animals can self-medicate on it. Willow and all tree leaves, or most tree leaves, have got tannins in the leaves. So tannins are antiparasitic. So again, they can self-medicate on that to decrease worm burdens. So, you know, whenever you start to put all the pieces of the puzzle together, there are so many benefits to growing trees for fodder, for shelter, that really they should be an integral part of our farming systems. Aspect into it is that trees provide fuel for us. So we are 100% reliant on wood fuel to heat our home. So therefore, by planting trees for the future, we will have a future source of fuel, which is in effect free. Products as well from that. So we make charcoal here at Lynbreck on a fairly small scale, but we make it's all made from birch. You know, that's always something that people are really interested in. It's very difficult to find truly sustainable or regenerative charcoal from the UK. Final one to next final slide gives you an idea of the woodland layout as it currently stands. So if I move my cursor, these are the existing woodland blocks. This is an area here where we've planted our woodland creation. This area here is all in natural regeneration. This line here is our hedgerow, so 900 metres of native hedging. This is an area of a new shelter belt, so we were expanding this existing line of trees. So we've got 320 trees in here as a shelter belt. These squares are the tree boxes, so those are tree hay boxes, so we've got 10 of those. And then this line here is our edible hedgerow of goat willow, grey willow, neared willow. So you can see how at the minute it's still looking quite bare, but in quite a few, in you know 10-20 years time, Lynbreck is going to be really quite transformed. And what we're trying to do really is to just shift away from that idea that animals and agriculture is separate from our tree systems. It's absolutely definitely not. It's completely integral. They both need each other. And that we feel is very much part of what we're trying to do in working with nature and harnessing the power of nature to improve the long-term resilience of our farm business. We don't plant in monoculture blocks. We very much plant in diversity. What we want is diversity. That gives us resilience. And we hope in time, even though we have lots of fencing all around the croft, we hope in time to remove that when the trees get established. And to really make the landscape and encourage the landscape to get a bit more of a naturalistic feel to it. In time, we're also thinking about planting more trees within our fields, but these were our food crops. And again, they will be incorporated within our livestock business. So we're thinking about nut and fruit crops within our fields here. So we've really got a lot of quite exciting plans going forward. In some kind of woodland, hedgerows, tree hay crops, woodland, new woodland, regeneration. It's going to be a really diverse setup. So that's probably about all from me. I think I've probably talked far too much. Sorry, Annie. Do so. I'll be here to the end.
Thank you very much, Lynn. There was a comment there about a great presentation, and I definitely agree. It really interesting, really rich, and given a lot of technical input as well. So there's a couple of questions. I think you might be able to see them, but I'll read them out for everybody, and I wonder if you can give some comments. So Luke asks, how do you monitor the impact of the pigs on the ground flora, and is there any ongoing surveying on the level of disturbance or if the ground needs a break?
Okay, so that's a really good question. So I guess a lot of what we're doing here is fairly new in this area. So we're having to learn by doing, and learning by doing means learning by your gains. It also means learning by where you made your mistakes. So what we're trying to do is kind of get a base kind of visual at which, something that kind of looks about right. So somewhere where there's been a bit of disturbance, but not too much. Your question about rest is really key. So we carry about 12 pigs a year in blocks of basically in 3 blocks, and now we could carry many more pigs. We have lots of space, we have lots of room, but what we're thinking about with our pigs is like a 10, 15, 20-year cycle. Okay, so when an area has been pigged, I don't think it's a scientific term, it's just one that we use. When an area has been pigged, our plan is to not pig that area for many years, 5 to 10 years, to allow that ground to really recover, because pigs, whenever they work through an area, they can be quite invasive. And, we see that, different pigs have different characteristics. So some will, they'll have their nose in the ground and they'll be plowing through there. Others, they're not interested. They don't dig as much. So there's lots of different variables to take into it. But the point about rest is that if an area has been pegged, then we sit back and we watch and we observe. So whenever we took on Lynbreck, we had a vegetation survey done, and that's our baseline. So what we will do is we use that as basically a monitor. But whenever we've had an area that's been pegged, we're planning on giving it many, many years rest before we can really assess the impact that the pigs have had. So kind of check back with us in a few years. But what we are seeing in some of the areas, so area we had pigs in last year, we're seeing new rowans pop up, which were not in that woodland before. So tiny little seedlings are popping up. We're really hoping to see more ground flora coming through without pigs.
Thanks, Lynn. There's a couple of questions about advice. I'm going to come to them next, but there's also a couple of questions about the types of trees that you use for the tree hay. Could you comment a little bit more about how you harvest the trees, how you dry them, how you store the leaves, how they're used for feed, and whether privet is an option for tree hay? Thank you.
Okay, so we have a vlog on our YouTube channel. I'm terrible at vlogging, so I don't update it very regularly. But we did do one on tree hay, so that would be something that I would very much encourage you to have a look at, because in that we show you how we kind of dry the hay and then feed it out to the animals. But in effect, we cut it and we bundle it, into basically about as much as I can grab with my hand. We tie it really, we use cable ties to tighten it really tightly together, and then we tie a string around the cable tie and we hang it up in our barn, and then our barn is wooden, so we can hang many rows of tree hay for it to dry. And again, we've put some pictures up on social media of this, so please go back into our Twitter, Instagram, Facebook feeds to have a look at this and see it coming up. In terms of the species that we chose to grow for tree hay, well, basically, we really wanted to grow ones that would grow well in the area that we wanted to plant them in. So the first thing was what's growing here already. Now, in most cases, that was stuff that was being really heavily munched by deer, but we could identify that it was, things like willow, alder, birch. We've got lots of birch on the croft. We decided not to plant more of that for our tree hay, so we were left with willow and alder. Now, when we looked into willow and its properties, it's very palatable. It's got lots of really good medicinal and nutritional benefits. So we decided to focus mainly on planting willow, but we did also plant a little bit of alder. Now, alder is really fast growing. It's nitrogen fixing, tannins in the leaves. Not very tasty, apparently, to livestock. Apparently, it's one of the ones that deer will not browse on. But we have planted it because we're going to include it as part of our trial to dry as part of the winter crops. So that's how we chose the species that we planted. Privet, I'm afraid I don't know if it can be used as tree hay or not. I'm sorry, I don't have that information.
That's okay, Lynn. We could follow that up as well. I don't know if the Institute has that knowledge, but we'll definitely look into it for the participants. And I mentioned there's a couple of questions about advice, but I'd actually like to hold on them. So apologies to the people that have posed them, but I'm hoping that you might reflect on that at the end about, how you've come into this and where you've looked for advice and help in setting up your new croft and also the agroforestry side of things. So I'm going to move on now to our next speaker because time is marching on. But thank you again, Lynn. That's really helpful. My colleague also says that she thinks privet may be poisonous, so we should certainly find out the right answer to this. I know that stick insects like it, but stick insects are not Highland cows, so we shouldn't participate. We shouldn't pass on the wrong information there. So I'm just going to pass on, just going to introduce our next speaker. And that is Lynn White from Scottish Forestry. Oh, sorry, I'm also confusing myself between opening files and screen sharing. Excuse my slower. And Lynn has warned me that she doesn't have good enough Wi-Fi for her video, so we just have to listen to Lyn's dulcet tones. But Lyn is Scottish Forestry's Forestry and Farming Development Officer. She has a practical farming background, not a forestry one, and she's already been very busy in the 1 year that she's been in post with Scottish Forestry. And part of her job is, like today, to speak directly to farmers and crofters about the benefits of integrating trees into their business. So no hard sell, and certainly not in this presentation, but just pointing out the options for farmers and crofters, as Lyn says, in these uncertain times, and to highlight that Scottish Forestry are here to help, and I'm sure are one of the types of advisory organisations that support people like Lyn and Sandra at Lynbreck. So I'm just going to pass on the sharing rights to Lyn. Excuse me, Lyn. Are you okay, Lyn? Are you ready to go?
That's me, Annie. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
There we go. Hope everybody can hear me all right. Just to say thank you, Annie, for asking me along today. And Lyn, thanks very much for a great presentation. I can add to that hopefully, and as we go. So as Annie said, I'm relatively new in my job and have an agricultural background rather than a forestry one. But coming from an agricultural background and going on what Lyn was discussing there earlier on, we can look at the benefits of that woodland can bring to your croft, your farm or your land that you've got. So Lyn very positively spoke about shelter and shade, protecting crops, habitat and everything like that, very important. Looking at the pollinators and the things like that that you need for crops and that kind of thing. And obviously the big one, the adapting to climate change and reducing carbon emissions on your farm and that type of thing by planting woodland. It's interesting, just some facts and figures to back those up, that if we look at there's 172 protected species that live in woodlands, and 75% of the UK's red squirrel population lives in our woodlands. So yes, they're all very important, as Lyn has already mentioned. And just to go past some of the myths and realities that I've come across in the last wee while, land planted under your forestry grant scheme remains eligible for your basic payment. So if you're eligible at the moment and you plant trees, you still get that basic payment until it is no longer there. Again, looking at the benefits, somebody I think mentioned water courses in their questions and that type of thing. Obviously Lyn's put up fences to protect their willow and that kind of thing, so also as part of that under the forestry grant scheme, that you can have new fences and that type of thing to look at your boundaries and manage land and keeps biosecurity and things like that going forward. So all these benefits, as I've kind of mentioned there, can come under the forestry grant scheme. The woodland creation that Lyn spoke about, and within that there's the initial planting payment that covers your design of your woodland, which is very important. It's just like any other crop, it needs to be designed well. The ground prep, as discussed, what's right for your area, what's right for the trees that you're going to plant. And also the trees and the planting of them is covered in the initial payment. I'll show you a slide just in a moment with the payments for that. Over and above your initial planting, you'll get annual maintenance payments. So that'll look at keeping the trees right in the first 5 years. So we'll pay an annual payment on that, just to make sure that you get a really good start. Same as anything, any crop or that you want to look after and make sure it's established well. So that could be controlling the weeds. It could be just making sure your tree densities are right. Lyn mentioned what they'd planted at, that it was 1600 a hectare and that type of thing. So it's important that you maintain those tree densities to be able to get your grant and things like that. Another thing that was mentioned was the vole guards, the tree protectors, the deer fencing and things like that. There is also a capital grant for that to make sure, again, that the trees are well established. you don't have the deer coming in and nibbling the tops off your trees. You've not got voles, depending on what situation you plant them in. They love a nice wee green ball of grass just to go and nibble at the bottom of your tree and things like that. So want to avoid that when you went to all the time and effort to plant your trees. And importantly, one of the things that Lynn mentioned really at the beginning was, what is your objective? What do you want those trees for? Is it biodiversity? Is it timber? Is it shelter? Is it shade? What actually do you want this woodland creation to do for you? And that's the main thing, is looking at your objective on what you want to create on your croft, on your farm or anything like that. What is your objective? There is, as it says there is 9 grant support options there that have requirements, again, back to Lynn saying about the composition and the tree densities and what you can actually grow and things like that. And another important thing just to mention, that not like some other schemes and that kind of thing, the forestry grant scheme is open all year round. It's not a case of you waiting for a window or anything like that. You can apply any time that you have your proposal together and your application together. And importantly, again, Lynn came back to speaking to Scottish Forestry and speaking to the Woodland Trust. I'll come to that further on. But again, when you're at the early stages of your proposal and that, speak to your local Scottish Forestry office. There are woodland officers within those offices that all have their own beats and that kind of thing. So know what's going on the ground, what goes, what does well. So if you're at the early stage of your proposal, speak to your woodland officer and get that bit of guidance, like Lynn mentioned earlier on, about what will grow well, what kind of protection you might need, and things like that. So they're an important part of things forward for you. As I say, we're looking at the initial here. As I say, there's quite a raft of different types of payment there. So anything from your conifer, your diverse conifer and your broadleafs, which are kind of your commercial side of things, kind of for planting. But there is also there as well I think Lynn mentioned theirs was a native broadleaf, so there's your native broadleaf there. Some of the other ones that you might want to look at are the small farm woodland. Again, that takes anything up for a quarter of a hectare up to a maximum of 10 hectares, maximum 5 hectare blocks. So there's a lot of variety within these once you go into the grant pages and that kind of thing, and you can have a wee look around what type of trees that you would grow within that option, what would be suitable, how much open ground you're allowed and things like that, and what actually makes it all work together. The other one there as well that might be of interest is the native broadleaves in Northern and Western Isles. That's an interesting one that again ranges from a quarter of a hectare up to 3 hectares depending on where you are, and is available in the Crofton counties, but it's very specific about the eligibility to that. But again, worth looking into and speaking to your local office about. As you can see, the payments, you've got your, I've lost my wee cursor, there he is. You've got your initial planting there, and then you've got, as I say, you get an annual payment for your maintenance, so that will be paid annually for 5 years till you get the trees really well established and everything like that. Other options, I'll come on to them in a minute. As I mentioned, you've got the capital grants there. So these again are put in place to look at what you've actually got on your croft or your farm and what you actually might need. Obviously, Lynn said they've deer fenced there because they have a problem with deer. So that, again, that can be taken into consideration as a capital grant. Your tree shelters, your vole guards and that type of thing as well. So it's all about getting that crop well established. Trees are just like any other crop. You have to consider the species that you're going to grow, or as in crop or variety, the soil conditions on how do you cultivate, how do you establish them, how do you give them the best start, the nutrients, the type of soil that you're putting them into and everything like that as well, the exposure, the height that you're at and that kind of thing. And again, protection. It might be usually you're thinking about aphids and caterpillars and things like that. But in this sense, you're talking about things that are slightly bigger, like voles and deer and hares and rabbits and that kind of thing, that you really have to protect these trees against to give them a really good start and get them away and give yourself, again, like anything else, a viable crop at the end of the day. And it's like anything else. In certain areas, you will Lynn mentioned again, the types of trees that they've planted in the wet areas, they know that they'll grow well. You look around, what's actually doing really well round about, what is going to grow. It's all right saying we would like to grow whatever it happens to be, alder or aspen or anything like that, but is it actually going to go and give you a viable crop? It's not like you in Scotland, you're not going to go grow maize, you're not going to grow lucerne or anything like that. It's actually getting the right type of trees that will grow. And as I say, within the options, there's a wide variety within there that you could actually grow. Somebody mentioned, I think, in their previous questions, they were talking about target areas. Now, there is, as you can see there, I'm not going to read them out. They cover a wide area. The Loch Lomond National Park, the Highlands, the Cairngorms National Park, and connected to the local authority woodland strategy and that kind of thing. So again, if you're looking at that, it's worth speaking to the local office and just see if you fit into these target areas. Because again, even looking at the small woodland there, there is a fair old uplift. And there's £300 a hectare there, and there's £50 for when you're looking at your maintenance or any of these. So it's worth just looking at what area you're in, and would you be eligible for that extra payment as well. So all very important, and just building a picture of what you want to do and what's actually feasible on the land. Not within those one, but we do have another scheme that might be of interest to people. It's a kind of combination of what we call sheep and trees. It's been out there for a few years now, that you can actually combine a woodland creation grant and an infrastructure grant. So if you, again, in some situations, want to plant an area but access isn't great or anything like that, your sheep and trees comes into that. It's I think it's a maximum of 10 hectares and that kind of thing. But again, it's one of these options that you've got an area that you're into, you think, oh, we can't plant because we can't have access. It's looking at the long term of managing that woodland, putting those trees in the ground, putting the road in, so when they come to harvest them, or you manage them, or you're thinning them or anything like that, that road is there. So to get that access and to make that a viable crop, having that the road in place. So I've kind of went through there quickly, but just to come back to, we have a lot of options out there that hopefully will meet your objectives. As I say, we're looking at here anything for a quarter of a hectare up the way. There is obviously certain ones like small farm woodland goes up to 10 hectares. The one in the Northern Western Isles, the maximum there's 3 hectares, depending on where you are in your eligibility. But there is, within these 9 here, there is a vast array that hopefully will meet your objectives, which is then, again, which is the important thing, going back to what Lynn was saying, what they wanted to do in the croft, what they wanted to achieve, and everything like that was met by finding that option, working with a woodland officer, working with a woodland trust and everything like that to make it happen. And you can see that they're building on that. It's not just one option. You can combine options if you want to do different things and everything like that, making sure you're eligible, making sure that the trees are actually going to grow, kind of thing, and you've got your pests under control, you know how to protect your trees and that kind of thing. So hopefully you've got the options there that you're looking for, whatever size or scale it may be. As you see here, we're your forestry experts, your woodland officers. So when you're starting out on that journey and you've got a proposal, speak to your woodland officer about it and just see, right, is this kind of, just to give that wee bit of guidance and that kind of thing, and just say, this is what we're thinking. So early stage of proposal, get in there kind of thing and see what we can do to help out. As I say, again, back to your objective. What is your objective? It could be one thing, it could be 6 things, it could be a dozen things, but again, it could be bringing habitats together, creating wildlife corridors, shelter. It could be for taking a bit out, you could be doing a bit of riparian planting and that kind of thing, just to get trees in there to soak up a bit of water or keep stock in a certain area. Again, the fences are there and that kind of thing for that. Just to say, I'll send Annie the links that we've put in here, so that you can look on the website and that. And we've got a really good paper that covers the Forestry Corporation grant, natural generation and things like that. So we've got a nice wee document there that it's really easy to read and gives you the facts, and then it's got a couple of good contacts at the end of it. So we'll get that sent to you at the end after the presentations and that kind of thing. So just to say, that's our local offices. Depending on where you are in the country, you can see there. So they're there to, as I say, at the early stages of your proposal, just to make sure you're on the right track and that kind of thing to get that. And obviously, Sandra mentioned Lynn mentioned the Woodland Trust. We work very with the Woodland Trust, as you can see. As part of, we support the Croft Woodlands project, so you can see there what they do. There's their Facebook page and their contacts and that there. So there again, work with them very closely to make things happen, to get trees in the ground. So anything you've kind of got, depending on scale, because they do the smaller side as well. We go to 1/4 hectare, but we're looking at something that's smaller than that. And as they say, Lynn mentioned the More Hedges funding as well, so that might be of interest to you. But there, as I say, we work very closely with them on getting trees in the ground in certain areas. They do work, it's got the Croft and Woodlands project there. They do work all over Scotland. They have project officers all over Scotland. Just certain things that they do under the Croft Woodland project that their other officers don't do, but definitely worth having a chat with them. And as I say, we work closely with them together. And just as if anybody's interested, there's funding available through the Farmer Advisory Service to apply to them for up to £1,000 of funding to get a forestry advisor onto your croft or your farm. Again, to look at what you might be thinking about and that kind of thing, and they can look at the most suitable grants and assistance packages and that, as it says there. So please, if you've got ideas in your heads or anything like that, your objective is very important, key. There is umpteen different options out there that you might want to look at that will be to meet those objectives and everything like that. And obviously there's opportunities for help from ourselves, from Woodland Trust, and from this funding that is fairly straightforward to apply for and take you to that next step on decision making and everything like that. So right place, right reason, and hopefully that's giving you a whistle stop tour. Not as interesting as Lynn and our beautiful pictures of our pigs, but that's me, Annie. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Lynn. That was a really interesting, really gave a lot of information that people will definitely want to follow up. So thank you very much for providing that overview of all the plethora of funding opportunities for different locations, different types of farming enterprises and different objectives. And I hope that many more people come to you wanting to plant tree hugs, as Lynn mentioned earlier. But there's a couple of questions, if you could give some quick responses. So Carol asks, if the land is fenced off from animals to allow trees to be established, is this land still included in the BPS payment? So she thought that they were, when areas were fenced off, they became exclusion zones. So she says it's good news if they're still applicable to basic payment scheme. Do you have any thoughts on that, Lynn, please?
I'm sorry, I can't actually answer that. What we have is that if you plant trees on an area that was eligible for BPS, it still becomes eligible, because I'll just got the word in here, if you bear with me a second. It says, since 2015, farmland that is eligible for basic payment scheme and is afforested under forestry grant scheme will continue to be eligible for the basic payment scheme. So if it was eligible and you to have a forestry grant scheme on it, it will still be eligible for that BPS payment. So that's it, so because there used to be previously, as far as I'm aware, that if you planted trees, you lost that payment, as far as I'm aware. But since 2015, any ground that was planted under the forestry grant scheme and was eligible for the BPS still continues to get it.
That's very encouraging. Thank you very much, Lynn. A second question asks whether Scottish Forestry are able to do site visits at the moment, and what's the usual timescale to request a visit. So if somebody asks, how soon can you come out and visit someone?
It's like everything else at the moment. It's depending on what workload and that type of thing they've got, because obviously we're playing catch up at the moment. So what I would do is I would email the local office and start the conversation that way, and just see what the availability and the possibilities are. But again, just start that conversation, drop them an email, say what you're proposing and that kind of thing, and they will come back to you. As I say, it's different in different areas, it is because of the workloads and things like that. So I wouldn't like to give a definitive answer and say it'll take this long or whatever kind of thing. But it's better to just start that conversation and take it from there, because each office is working at different rates and different workloads. So I would say just drop them an email and start the conversation, and that's the best thing to do, I would imagine.
Thanks, Lynn. And there's also another question from a new entrant to Woodland Croft, and it's a little bit complicated, but she has some questions again about eligibility for funding. She has been told that because the area of land that she's coming into was previously a forest, she's actually ineligible for grants that for creating forestry or the capital grants around deer fencing. And I guess the same case would be, get in touch with the local officer and explore your site and your objectives. But I wonder if you have any more information there, Lynn.
No, you're correct there, Annie. I would get in contact with your local office, because they'll know if she's saying that type of thing. They'll know what's happened on the ground before, if it's had trees on before, if it's had grant before and that kind of thing. So definitely go to your local office and just state that question. As I say, they're the ones on the ground. That's the fact that we have woodland officers that have their own beats and everything like that, know exactly what's happening there or has happened in the past or what is about to happen and that kind of thing. So best to go directly to those offices, because they're the people on the ground that know what's happening.
That's great. Thank you very much, Lynn. So I'm going to move on now, and obviously we will still take any questions that people have for both Lyns so far, but we'll move on to my next speaker, which is my colleague, Dr. Claire Hardy. Claire's an interdisciplinary scientist. She specialises in social research, looking at learning and change and the use of virtual tools for stakeholder engagement. And her work focuses on developing these virtual tools to enhance learning and stakeholder engagement. And this is what we're doing this afternoon. We're hopefully learning in a virtual environment. And these tools consist of the Hutton Digi environments, including DigiForest, DigiFarm and DigiCroft, which are simulated platforms that depict generic environments and give an opportunity to visualize these sorts of innovations. And the technology is being explored to enhance scenario planning discussions, to allow woodland expansion projects to be discussed. And we're creating new tools as well, including virtual tours. And we're going to participate in a virtual tour now of the Glensaugh Agroforestry Project. So I'm just going to stop sharing and pass over the screen to Claire, who's going to take us virtually to Glensaugh, and she'll also introduce Glensaugh, which I will pause. Excuse me. Okay, Claire, the privileges are now with you. Thank you. And you're just muted at the moment.
Hi, can everybody hear me? Right.
Yes, we're on. Thanks, Claire.
So this is the agroforestry plots at Glensaugh. Glensaugh is a Hutton farm, research farm that's based near Lawrencekirk. The agroforestry experiment was set up in 1988, which is a fair amount of time ago, and it was to look at grazing alongside producing commercial wood. The experiment actually stopped in 2001, and in 2008 they started using it to graze suckling herd as well as grazing sheep. And I'll just show you a quick drone footage so that you can see. So the first plot here is Scots pine, and that's 400 trees per hectare. And the next one is hybrid larch, again at 400 trees per hectare. So they're quite dense. Coming up, you can see this is sycamore, and they're only at 100 trees per hectare. And in the distance, you can see there are cattle grazing there. And on the hill, they're fenced away from the actual trees. That's a flock of black-faced sheep. This is a second plot, which is sycamore, and they're planted at 400 trees per hectare. So again, very dense. Well, what I'd really like to do is to take you inside the plots on a virtual tour. So the virtual tour is actually created with 360-degree videos, which means that you can move around within them. We've got information pieces embedded in here, so you can find out about the trees and about the grazing and the animals that are here. You can look up into the canopy. So here we can see this is Scots pine that we're in, and the canopy is relatively open. It's creating some shelter in this plot. There is grass growing. The sward isn't particularly thick, but there is some opportunity to graze, and there's some shelter opportunities. But if we quickly go into the hybrid trees, then you can see here that it's very dense. The tree canopy is quite closed. There is very little, pretty much no grazing here at all. There's a lot of shelter though. So cattle, they come in here when the weather's really coarse. You can see there's some poaching. But if we move up into the sycamore, this is a sycamore plot that's 100 trees per hectare, so it's nice and open. And we can see that we've got cattle grazing here in the distance. It was quite a windy day when we took these videos, so sorry for that. But if we move up to the next sycamore tree plot, this is 400 trees per hectare. This is the videos were taken in about October, so the trees are beginning to lose their leaves. There's quite a lot of tree leaf falling underground, but there's very little grazing opportunity. And really, at this time of year, the shelter is not particularly good either. As the video goes, you can see that the light's coming back again. So that's our virtual tour. I can share the link with you so that you can go in and have a better look. There's a lot of information in there. It's really good for, you can go and have a look yourself. You can actually view it on a virtual reality headset. You can put it onto your phone and you can use a cardboard headset. You can also use something like an Oculus Quest, which will allow you to move around and to view it in a very virtual reality experience. That's really all that I have to show you. If there's any questions, I'm more than happy to try and answer them.
Thank you very much, Claire. I think it's really nice to sit in your kitchen and actually to have a sense of being out on the hill and in amongst the different types of trees. I suppose my question is, how have you used this so far, and in particular in the opportunity to bring together different types of farmers or to share knowledge between farmers who are considering agroforestry? Have you had any experience of using this tool to bring different people together and have this sort of discussion?
Yeah, we've been using the tool quite a lot to do these kind of virtual experiences and to allow people to experience being in the forest, being in the agroforestry unit from their own homes. It's also really useful for us to be able to allow people the opportunity to widen their access to the agroforestry, because at the moment people can't travel around through restrictions. People are very remote and they're able to visit it when they have free time. We've also been using similar virtual tours for the Arable Scotland event, so that people could see virtual tours of the Sustainable Cropping Centre at Bardassery and Greaves House at Bardassery as well, as Arable Scotland had to be cancelled, of course. So, yeah, really useful to able to allow us to engage with stakeholders. We've actually got some funding to do some more work where we're going to try and use it for scenario planning. So one of the modelers is going to put in the different woodland expansions experiences, and then we're going to be able to share it with stakeholders so that we can gather their feedback on possible scenarios for woodland expansion.
Thanks, Claire. And I've got a question from Jessica, our former colleague, and she's mentioned that it's interesting that the experiment has only included monoculture blocks. And do you know why in the original experiment they didn't explore more diverse planting or different blocks of forestry? So you mentioned that it had been planted quite a long time ago. We can see that from the growth of the trees, but maybe a bit more history on why they chose those blocks. Thank you.
Well, as you can imagine, I wasn't working at Glensaugh in 1988, so I'm really not that able to answer why they chose just these. I would imagine it was easier to control. They have gone on to plant some of the blocks with more diverse planting, and it would be interesting if we could get some feedback from the farm manager, Donald Barry. I'm sure he'll be more than happy to give us some answers, and we could maybe come back to you with that.
Thanks very much, Claire. Glensaugh is one of our research farms, and we are very willing to share knowledge that comes from Glensaugh with anyone who's interested, or that they can see the opportunity of using this virtual reality as a planning tool for your own woodland expansion on your farm or croft, and also using this technology in different settings. So it may be that Claire connects with Lynbreck in the future and can record the progress of your agroforestry process. I wanted to open up the discussion now a little bit between the participants, and also to reflect back on some of the questions that we've received earlier. There were a couple of good questions about advice, and this is of real interest to the NEFERTITI project, because as I mentioned at the outset, NEFERTITI is looking to support new entrants and to encourage people who haven't considered a career in agriculture to look at it as an option, either young people or not so young people. And so a couple of people asked Lyn Cassels what sort of advice you needed. So in addition to your own forestry and tree growing expertise, where did you get the wider advice from about different species, locations, and did you have any specific advice from certain organisations that you might pass on? And I'll ask Lyn Cassels if you could reflect on that first, but maybe Lynn White, you might also have some thoughts. Thanks, Lynn.
Okay, so I suppose the first thing to clarify is that a lot of our experience in working with trees was very practical. So it was everything from planting to felling to coppicing to collarding. You know, we had like, you know, maybe 7-8 years practical experience on the ground. So we know trees, but what we didn't have experience in until we moved here was, I guess, the bureaucratic side of things. So the paperwork, the applications, all that sort of stuff. So the question about species, how did we try to decide what species to plant? There's a huge amount of Scottish forestry resources that are available for the general public online. So back in the day, Lynn White will be able to clarify this for me, but back in the day it used to be called Forestry Commission Map Viewer. I think if you just type in Google Scottish Forestry Map Viewer, it'll come up with like an online GIS system. And what you can do is basically you can kind of zone into your area, and it has loads and loads of layers. And so you can look at things like, you know, what's the sort of the soil type here in my area is supposed to be, and that uses an overlay from, you know, research that James Hutton have done, for example. Or it will model what kind of woodland is right for your area, or it will say, you know, oh, there used to be trees here in the past because it was done in a survey of native woodland back in the day. And, you know, so there's a huge amount of information that you have to put into your application that you can actually access yourself. It just takes a little bit of finding it, but it's all there. So that's how we species we're going to plant, because we looked at the soil type, we looked at the climate, we looked at the geology, all on the Scottish Forestry Map Viewer. So we did it ourselves because we could do that for free. And we fell into what was called a W17 category woodland, and therefore that was what modelled the species choice that we decided to plant. So that's how we kind of went about it. In terms of organisations, so I think what I have to say to people is, really, if you know your land, have confidence in the fact that you know your land best. So look at what's growing around. That'll give you an indication of what grows well. There will inevitably be some missing species because of, you know, possibly previous deforestation or overgrazing or whatever. But have confidence that you know what's going on in your ground. And whenever you approach organisations for advice, you know, go to the ones that are going to give you the free advice first. So generally that will be, you know, the Woodland Trust or your woodland officer. And, you know, we generally found that we were able to develop a really positive working relationship whereby we were the experts, because we were the experts on our ground. We knew our ground. But they could help guide us through the kind of the sections of the application, which kind of said, okay, you need to do a little bit of that in there, or you need to say this in that section. So really, it's kind of having confidence that you actually know what's best. If you know your land and you know nature, and then get those people around you to just support you. And it is possible to put in the application that way.
Thanks, Lynn. That's really nice, passionate message, and inspiring and empowering people. Lynn White, I wonder if you have any thoughts about where people can go for advice, or where you have looked for advice in your new role, for instance. And I think you need to unmute, Lynn.
Thanks, Annie. I would go back to what Lynn was saying there. There is a wealth of knowledge actually on the Scottish Forestry website. When you go into that, there's a great little booklet that we can send you the link to that discuss more or less what I've discussed there about kind of initial payments and what they are and everything like that. And it goes into, again, Lynn said about the mapping and that kind of thing. That's important when you're looking at what species you can grow and that kind of thing. And there is it takes you through different levels. If you look at the suitability of tree species and things like that, it again looks at the target areas and things like that you might be interested, that you need to look at, and it takes you through bit by bit kind of thing. It'll take you through eligibility, what's involved and everything like that, and decisions, and it gives you like guidance to say go and look here or go and look there kind of thing, and just takes you through. But again, as Lynn was saying, there is support there from, again, getting in there early with your woodland officer and that kind of thing, and saying this is what we're thinking about kind of thing. Does this, what do we need, looking at the documentation and that type of thing as well that you're going to require. So again, as Lynn says, a good working relationship from the start. This is what we're thinking. Speak to them, drop them an email, and just say, kind of, this is what we're after. And as I say, it's the same as me when I started. As I say, I have an agricultural background. I don't have a forestry background, so I just went on to Scottish Forestry website and went through the links there. There's a lot of information on there. There's case studies. There is like things I've run through about the benefits and that. But if you just go through it, and then it'll take you through the process, and then obviously there's the when you get into the application side, it will state what you require there about your mapping and things like that. But again, build that relationship with your woodland officer right from the start, and hopefully you have the same outcome as Lynn and Sandra have as a thriving woodland on their croft.
Thanks very much, Lynn. And yeah, I agree. I hope that using the free advice and then also accessing the types of funding, I was really intrigued that there is actually a support from Farm Advisory Scotland to pay for specialist advice. But as you said, Lyn Cassels, you can also bring in practical experience from elsewhere, but you might need more assistance with the bureaucracy side of things. And some people will have a different balance of where their experience lies from previous professional experience or agricultural college, or even working with forestry as you did before. And I wanted to ask both the Lyns as well, what types of interactions with other people have been most useful to you? So where have you found good knowledge exchange opportunities that other people might want to go and seek out? And Lynn, at Lynbreck, you're offering these sorts of on-farm, on-croft demonstrations. Have you been elsewhere, and what have you found useful or inspiring? And I'll pass over to Lyn Cassels first.
Yes, that's a good question. So, I mean, we're very much outdoorsy people. We like to be outdoors doing the work. But events such like these are really useful. So we've been to online events. I can't recommend enough, though, going out and seeing work on the ground. So I know we're sort of moving towards a world of being more web-based, but I don't think you can really, you can really beat actually seeing it in person. So that's why we started to run, croft tours, private tours, courses, all that sort of stuff, because I think that's really the best way to knowledge exchange. Then after that, it's the way, it's the same access everybody else has, internet searches, books, looking at, trying to find people who are doing similar things or things that we're interested in, and Googling it and trying to find resources that way. But I think going back to what I also said was a small idea, it's not always like a life-changing situation, but you get these little nuggets, and then you bring it back to what it is that which is your land and your farm and your business, and it's all those little nuggets that fit together in this kind of wall to create this beautiful structure that is your final kind of vision and goal. So I think it's tying it in with believe in yourself and believe in what it is that as well as what other people can tell you about.
Yeah, thank you, Lynn. And it also underpins that message that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. You're looking for what suits your land, but also your livelihood and the objective for your future. And so there might be broad approaches that you need to tailor, I suppose, to the local scale. Lynn White, I wonder if you have any reflections on that, having been an advisor and being out and about with farms, on farms and on crofts. Where have you seen good opportunities for knowledge exchange? And this is also with the hope that in the future we will be back together in person, and this is just a temporary virtual blip. Thanks, Lynn.
Thanks, Annie. Just to say, interestingly enough, I read a thing the other day, probably everybody's seen it, you should never turn down an opportunity. And that comes back to, I could go way back when I worked on a farm somewhere, and we did similar to what Lynn does. We did open days and everything like that, and I was asked to speak, and I was like, no, I don't speak, I look after the animals, thank you very much, I'm quite happy with them. People I don't do. But I was obviously told I needed to do it, which was fine. It's a wee while ago now, and I did it, and I would never be in the situation I am in today without having been given that opportunity to speak to people and tell them about what I did, learn from them and everything like that. So again, never turn down an opportunity, or I wouldn't be sitting here today in that sense.
Thanks, Lynn. Yeah, and so I suppose we all have the responsibility to share our knowledge, or to invite people onto to our land or onto our land holdings. at whatever stage of the process of being a new entrant you may be, or whether you feel you're an established farmer. And I've met people who define themselves as new entrants, but they've been farming for 30 years plus. So that's just because we're always still learning, or you're trying to gather knowledge from wherever you can. And I just had a final question just in the past few minutes, but I'd really encourage anyone who's still sitting on a thought or a question to pop it into the chat or into the Q&A. And also to reiterate that we will share the link to this webinar and the resources that Lynn White has mentioned, and also some links to the Lynbreck vlogs that have been mentioned and their social media, so you can follow up and also be in touch individually. But my question is about what's next, you know, the bigger picture for new entrants to farms and crofts in Scotland, and their aspirations to expand their woodland with great intentions for supporting biodiversity and overcoming the climate emergency. But what are the opportunities there, and what are the barriers, and what messages can we translate to the policymakers who are setting up these sort of grant applications, grant opportunities, and the policy in place? So again, maybe I could put this first I'll put this to Lynn White, because you're still unassisted, Lynn. But I wonder if you're seeing any opportunities or challenges that we can tackle in the Nefertiti project.
Annie, it's one of these things that knowledge is power, and knowing information and knowing where to go and everything like that, and having these open discussions, having these webinars that people can come from all over Scotland and that kind of thing, and seeing the practical example that Lynn and Sandra have got is absolutely fantastic, because from my perspective, things need to be practical. You have to discuss why you choose a certain site, why would you do this here, why can you not do there. So it's the practical discussions that I think are really important going forward. Yes, we're in a climate emergency, but things have to be practical for people to take them up in that sense. So again, why we have multiple options of grants, why we have woodland officers that you can speak to and discuss your proposals and that kind of thing. All about the practical and making things work for people, and hopefully them taking that on board, and everybody can do their bit, reducing their carbon footprint and things like that. So I think building that practical knowledge is key, and giving people information like this today so that you can facilitate it. That's the thing, is taking people from where they have an idea, where do they go next, seeing that it's practical possible because of what Lynn and Sandra have done at Lynbreck, and having those ideas and saying, right, this is our objective, how do we get there, and who can help us?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much, Lynn. And I'll pass over to Lyn Cassels for your thoughts as a practical and existing new entrant. Where are the challenges and opportunities?
Okay, it's a massive question, Annie. So that's quite a challenging one to answer. Okay, so I think the challenge is to remove these perceived barriers that it's trees versus agriculture, or it's trees versus farming. We just need to bin that. We need to move on from that. They're completely integral, and we can have them integral. It's just about finding the right system that works for your land. So we need to just move on from that. And the grant system, the woodland and the farm grant system, because they currently run separately, they need to be more aligned with encouraging one or the other. You know, the fact that you know if you have a field and it has trees or scrub in it, you know that you have less of a payment for basic payment, because that's kind of, you know, that has to be excluded. That's completely, in my mind, that's completely bonkers, because in that area of scrub there will be a really important invertebrate population. It will be habitat for nesting birds. You know, these will all be an intrinsic ecological part of your system. So really there needs to be much more synergistic, much more interconnected thinking in the grant system. And I think really the biggest opportunity that we all have to see at that is that it's all there for us. I think we do really have to acknowledge and accept that nature sits at the core of everything that what we do. It's not a nice to have. It's not that we have to make space of it. It's not on the periphery. It's the foundations of everything that we have. And it's what we choose to do with it that then has the impact on everything around us. So it's really, again, shifting our mindset of, you know, from managing nature to embracing nature, to working with nature, to harnessing the power of nature, and to really acknowledging that we're a part of that. And it's quite a nice relationship to have when it's a really positive one. So I think that's a real opportunity to look forward to in the future.
Thanks so much, Lynn. And yeah, you have great passion, and I think if you tell somebody to change their mindset, I'm sure that then that process will start to happen. There is one final question about starting with your business plan, and I've overran slightly, but I wonder if you can just give a quick indication about where you did that, how you got started, and so maybe not just Business Gateway, but was there an online tool or somebody that you spoke to? And then I will say thank you very much. So thanks, Lynn. Just one.
Okay, so again, it probably requires quite a long time to answer, but sort of in a short summary version, go and look at something that's called holistic management. So holistic management was designed by a guy called Alan Savory back in the day. And it's basically it's a framework, it's a tool, it gives you an idea as to how you develop your business plan, and it's based on three main principles. So your economic, so you need money coming in and you're coming out. It's based on the environment, so your environmental footprint, and it's also based on the social. So, you know, your livelihood, you know, how happy are you? How is this working for you? How healthy are you? And holistic management, whenever you look into those three systems and you make them the foundation of your business planning, that helps you to generate, you know, where it is that you want to go to in the future. And it really gives you the foundations. So we did write our own business plan. We had a 5-year business plan whenever we started. And that was in order to access one of the grants that we got, the Young Farmers Startup Grant. And it was a really useful process to go through, but by using holistic management to really infiltrate into the core of it, it wasn't all looking at how much money are we going to make? You know, it wasn't all about that. It was, we need to make this amount of money, we need to generate a profit so that we can pay these bills, but actually maybe it's better for our land to have less animals rather than more animals. Maybe it's better for our workload, you know, to be doing less of this, so that we've got time to relax and be happy and enjoy what it is that we're doing. So it's a really useful, I guess, balancing sheet to make sure that you're satiating all of your needs, and you're not sacrificing one for the other. So look into holistic management, and that's the best place to start.
Thanks, Lynn. That's really, really helpful tip. And we might follow up to find a reference to Alan Savory and put that in the email. And it's probably a good life advice as well. So I'm just going to, unfortunately, call an end, and just to put up this final slide of all of our partners in the NEFERTITI project. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is a 3-4 year project, so we have a full year next year of more demonstration events, and we'd really invite everyone to keep being a partner, keep participating in these online and in-person demonstrations when we get together again. To follow the Facebook page, and I will follow up with a mailing list as well. So after this event, I will send a quick feedback survey, and it would be really great to have your thoughts on how we run these sorts of future demonstration events. And thank you for all the encouraging comments and the great questions, and thank you especially to our speakers, to Lyn Cassels at Lynbreck, to Lynn White at Scottish Forestry, and to Claire Hardy at the James Hutton Institute. And I really appreciate all your time. I'm off for a late lunch now. So thank you very much, and goodbye for now.